Howard Phillips Lovecraft's stories inspired countless horror films, but no one brought them to life like Stuart Gordon. In this video, I'll go through every time he brought Lovecraft's works to the screen, and once as an audio play. The idea for Re-Animator came up one night when Stuart Gordon was talking with friends about vampire movies. He said there were too many Draculas and not enough Frankensteins. Someone mentioned Herbert West, Re-Animator by Lovecraft. Gordon hadn't read it, found a copy in the Chicago Public Library, and decided to adapt it. At first it was meant to be a stage play, then a TV pilot set in modern-day Chicago. When networks refused, producer Brian Usna convinced Gordon to turn it into a feature. They moved the project to Hollywood, brought in Mac Ahlberg as cinematographer, and used actors from Gordon's Organic Theater group. The story stayed close to Lovecraft, but with new energy, sharper, bloodier, faster. Makeup artist John Nolan used forensic photos for reference and poured over 12 gallons of fake blood. Jeffrey Combs played Herbert West, a medical student obsessed with defeating death. Filming took about a month. The result wasn't gothic or cosmic. It was clinical horror pushed to grotesque extremes. And it's worth mentioning, with Gordon's Re-Animator setting the stage, producer Brian Usna took over for 2 sequels, Bride of Re-Animator from 1990 and Beyond Re-Animator from 2003. They kept the story going, but the first will always stand apart. After Re-Animator, Gordon wanted to keep working with the same team. He liked the idea of doing for Lovecraft what Roger Corman once did for Poe, building a whole cycle with the same faces. From Beyond was based on a short story of the same name, about a machine that lets you see creatures living in another dimension. Gordon shot it in Italy to save money. The sets were built at Dino De Laurentiis's old studio outside Rome, and the budget stayed under $3 million. The production used 4 different effects teams, and the result was some of the best practical creature work of the decade. In the film, Dr. Pretorius, played by Ted Sorrell, creates the resonator, a device that stimulates the pineal gland and exposes a parallel universe of pleasure. When Pretorius is killed by creatures from this other dimension, his assistant, Dr. Crawford Tillinghast, played by Jeffrey Combs, is accused of murder. Psychiatrist Catherine McMichaels and Detective Bubba Brownlee take his case. To prove Tillinghast's innocence, they reactivate the resonator and bring the nightmare back. Shot through with pink and purple light and dripping with practical effects, From Beyond is pure 1980s body horror wrapped around a Lovecraft idea, and it still feels criminally underrated. Fast forward about a decade. Castle Freak reunited Gordon with Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, and it's the loosest Lovecraft adaptation he ever made. The film blends elements of The Outsider and the rats in the walls. The idea started in producer Charles Band's office, where Gordon noticed a random poster labeled Castle Freak, a man chained to a wall, being whipped by a woman. Band said there was no script, just a castle and a freak. Gordon could do whatever he wanted, as long as he kept both. He shot the film in Italy again, by the way, in the same castle he'd used for The Pit and The Pendulum, released in 1991. The budget was around $500,000, and the schedule was brutally short, just a few weeks. But Gordon had full control. No rating, final cut, and complete freedom with casting. He and writer Dennis Powley took The Outsider as a loose starting point, the image of a man discovering he's the monster, and built a grim, modern Gothic story around it. The film follows an American family inheriting an old Italian castle, unaware that a deformed man has been imprisoned there for years. Castle Freak is stripped of humor and drenched in guilt, grief, and cruelty. Each character carries their own torment, but none more than the creature itself. born into pain and locked away until madness takes over. Bleak and raw, Castle Freak trades the wild energy of Gordon's earlier Lovecraft films for something closer to the writer's own tone: slow decay and human horror that feels inescapable. The film follows Paul and Barbara, a young couple stranded off the coast of Spain after a storm wrecks their boat. They find their way to a nearby fishing village called Imboca, a decaying place where the locals stare too long and speak too little. When Barbara disappears, Paul discovers that the town hides a cult devoted to an ancient sea god called Dagon. The villagers aren't just worshippers, they're changing, growing gills and fins, breeding with something that lives below the surface. Gordon had wanted to adapt Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth since the mid-'80s, but studios weren't interested in a movie about fish people. As Charles Band once told him, "If it had vampires or werewolves, no problem, but fish people are too weird." It took years before Gordon finally made it happen. The film was shot in the small coastal town of Combaro in Spain, a place Gordon found through an Italian producer. Many of the locals appeared as extras, which gave the film an authentic edge. In the story, Combaro became Imboca, a play on Innsmouth, as the literal translation of Imboca means "in your mouth." The creature effects blended prosthetics, latex, and CGI. It's fair to say the digital shots haven't aged well. The practical effects look incredible up close. And while some parts don't quite fit with Lovecraft's slower kind of horror, and the two leads are no match for Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, it's still worth seeing. A few years later, Gordon directed an episode for the horror anthology Masters of Horror. It was a series that grew out of informal dinners organized by director Mick Garris, where some of the genre's best-known filmmakers would meet and talk about their craft. Gordon's episode, Dreams in the Witch House, was the second of the first season. It aired on November 4, 2005, and adapted Lovecraft's 1933 story of the same name. Ezra Godden, who had starred in Dagon, returned as Walter Gilman, a broke university student who rents a room in a crumbling boarding house and soon realizes something very wrong lives in the walls. Dreams in the Witch House updates Lovecraft's ideas, swapping quantum physics for string theory, but keeps the same sense of madness and inevitability. It's a smaller story than Re-Animator or From Beyond, but within the Masters of Horror anthology, it's easily one of the best episodes. And finally, let's step away from film altogether. In 2015, Stuart Gordon directed an episode for the horror podcast Tales from Beyond the Pale. Gordon's episode, The Hound, opened the show's third season. Adapted by Dennis Powley, it stays in Lovecraft's original 1920s setting and follows two grave robbers who uncover something that should have been left buried. Although the story echoes Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles, Lovecraft once said he was inspired after visiting an old cemetery in Brooklyn, where he broke off a piece of a tombstone from 1747 and later placed it under his pillow. Interestingly, The Hound was one of the few Tales from Beyond the Pale episodes based on an existing story. The series usually featured original scripts. The team is classic Gordon, Barbara Crampton, Ezra Godden, and Chris L. McKenna up front. It was his first time directing for audio, and he called the experience freeing. The listener builds the horror in their own head. It's not exactly essential listening, but if you're into Lovecraft adaptations, Gordon's work, or both, it's definitely worth checking out.